Hello everyone, welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author. In this video, we're going to be talking about a few different subjects here. The first being the Trojan horse, or emergency services. Now, in the military circles, mainly, there is a acronym. Well, it's not really an acronym, but 3 letters: EAP, which stands for Emergency Action Plan. This is what you do when you expect for your position to be overrun by the enemy. Depending on what your job is, every unit just about that has a likelihood of being overrun by an enemy will have an emergency action plan. It has to do with destroying or otherwise rendering useless certain objects or items which you don't want to fall into the enemy hands, and then, if possible, retreating or leaving, escaping otherwise. This could be as simple as, burning paper, right? It could be very simple. It could be also really complex, such as spiking cannons and rendering vehicles useless, etc. That is the best way to think about these emergency plans, these emergency management agencies. They are effectively implementers of an emergency action plan, which begs the question, of course, who is the enemy overrunning their position? Well, that answer is simple. It is us. It is the people. It's the population. It is whatever label they would like to give it. Either way, the enemy is anyone who's not a corporate employee or representative in some capacity, who's not executing a corporate function. It could be anything. It could be rival organizations too. Either way, the implementation of these emergency services plans, when you read into them, which I will do subsequently after this video and the next video, possibly in the next video, we will go through and dissect it exactly how the emergency action plan of these emergency management agencies works. Either way, the best way to think about these emergency services today is as a corporate because emergency services is really all about control. It's about corporate control. It's only we can do this and no one else can, sort of deal. One thing to notice is that emergency, the operative word in emergency is the word emergence, which means to come out of, to emerge, to the genesis is beginning. A genesis is a beginning. So an emergence doesn't necessarily mean a beginning. It just means it's coming out, coming up, emerging. The use of the term emergency services is similar, of course, to USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, where we hear emergency services and we think, oh, these people are here in case of an emergency. Yes, they are in case of an emergency. But whose emergency and by what parameters is that emergency determined? They brainwash us, of course, into thinking that every emergency, it's very obvious today that they try to make every little thing into an emergency. Right. Some things are emergencies in the context of being a desperate crisis situation. But the important thing about this is that the emergency services overcomplicate everything. Most of the things so-called emergency services have to deal with on a quote-unquote daily basis, or first responders, so-called, they overly complicate on purpose to make it seem like their jobs are harder than they actually are, and that you require specialized training to do it. When in actuality, most people do these things in general on their own without the need for so-called professionally trained assistance. Now, there's some certain components that are used for what we call emergency services. One are beacons or lights, and these are included with sirens or signals. Now, it is, of course, nice to note that signals used to be flags, and then they've become what we call today radio frequency communications, such as with cell phones. The next component of emergency services is medical, what most people term medical, which are, of course, band-aids and bandages and pharmaceuticals and various other. There's not actually that much involved in medical, even though you see these people with their, medical bags, which are huge. And they really only use a small compartment of that most of the time. Electrical is an interesting one. So most people think about emergency services only in the context of three things: force, fire, and first aid. That's why I call it 3 F's. Force, so-called law enforcement, police, sheriffs, troopers, state troopers, highway patrol, that sort of thing. Fire, of course, it's indicative, the so-called volunteer fire department. Fire department might be listed as volunteers, but they're really not. And again, all that stuff is still part of the corporate control mechanism. It is. We'll get into that in a minute. And then first aid, of course, being medical. Some things people don't usually think about as far as emergency services is electrical, going around and fixing the power lines and things like that. And anybody could do it. Anybody could go around and fix this stuff. Water, not just water in the sense of but water works, right? Like lakes and rivers and whatnot, but plumbing, right? Water for plumbing, faucets, the main water line, all of those things. Obstructions, right? Public works people and emergency services tend to put out obstructions and barriers and control things using those types of things. The belief has always been that those obstructions are placed because up ahead on the road maybe there's some type of hazard like a fissure or a hole is opened up. But more often it's a directive, as in we put this obstruction here and you're not allowed to go around it, and if you do, we'll fine you or yell at you or do something nasty, right? Either way, in the past, that's changing. In the past, people were under the assumption that obstruction was done and to keep somebody from driving off a cliff or something like that. So there is still a practical reason for the use of obstructions as far as ensuring that people on a route don't kill themselves, or at least that there is a warning that they're headed somewhere they don't want to be. That brings us to our next point, which are hazards, right? Emergency services people are supposed to go and clean up hazards. Of course, nowadays that's not the case, but that's the whole point about this thing. Is what we're talking about is what their alleged purpose is, what they're supposed to be doing. Another is debris, cleaning up debris, fallen debris or road debris, anything created. Force protections is a big one. Nowadays, force protections are used as a control mechanism a threat of force to maintain control, as in be obedient or else, right? Do what we say or else. But there's other reasons for force protections beyond that. Nowadays, considering the fact that everything is framed in the context of obey or else, it's sort of hard to think about force protections in their original light and what they originally were supposed to do. You set up a security mechanism to ensure that an individual who's coming along and fixing electrical or power lines or working on a plumbing or something like that, they don't have to worry about their environment, their surroundings, because you have somebody posted there who's doing all that. That just doesn't mean that they've got a gun sitting there waiting for the individual to come out of the forest or the woods or the shadows to attack them because they're up to no good. That's what force protection has become. Some dude standing there watching the back of the individual who's creating sabotage and who's ripping up the roads and destroying people's houses and doing things like that, and setting gas line leaks and a whole bunch of other stuff, because that's what the emergency services and public works people are doing today. The original purpose for it was, in fact, the guy who's doing something right, who's trying to fix something, does not have to worry about watching his own back. Because if you're out there on your own, up there in one of those bucket things and fixing power lines and whatnot, it's nice to have somebody standing guard, as it were. Now, the next thing that we think about with emergency services, or less so, is snow, right? People only ever think about the 3 F's: force, fire, and first aid. Snow is another thing. When you have a lot of snow, you've got people in more rural areas would have snow plows and they go out and do stuff. But if you're in the city and things like that, they do not like regular people with snow plows going out there and cleaning up the roads. And if they did have regular people going out with snow plows cleaning up the roads, they would always find a way to claim ownership or claim so-called social credit for the activities of others, which may or may not be directly related to them. And we all know who I'm talking about, of course. The municipal councils and the people who walk out in front of cameras and act like they're special, but really they're just stuffed shirts and they never say anything useful, and we all know them. Rain and flooding, that's another one. Now, I've personally seen many different types of instances that would be considered emergencies when it comes to rain and flooding, especially around North Carolina. The emergency services are never to be found. Once something gets really dangerous, they always declare it's too dangerous for emergency services to be out, and then they send out a thing saying, stay in your homes, shelter in place, or whatever nonsense, right? They always do that. Because it has nothing to do with emergency services. It has to do with control. And the regular people, the people who are not afraid of their shadow and every little moronic thing and aren't controlled by a bunch of nitwits on trustee boards and all of the other stuff that they like to call themselves, those are the people that go out and take care of these situations. Those are the people that in the past would have been putting up barriers to keep rising rivers from flooding over, sandbags and whatnot. We have completely lost the capability for individuals, in most cases, to go out and just fix stuff because they're all afraid of the threat leveraged by current so-called emergency services and public works. Another thing is plumbing. I did sort of mention that when it came to water, but you've also got plumbing, public works, emergency services, as far as getting rid of trash and garbage, and that also has to do, of course, with plumbing. That's a big deal, right? So those are things that need to be considered. Those things can become an emergency if they're not taken care of. And regular people can absolutely take care of all of this stuff. It's not difficult. It's not only is it overcomplicated, but it's also enforced. The control aspect is enforced. The next is gas, the gas lines, but also gas leaks and a whole bunch of other stuff. Food, that's a big one, right? Food shortages, water shortages, weather. And of course, weather involves snow and rain, but I think in many cases, rain and flooding and snow, they don't have specifically to do with weather because there's all sorts of weather. So I think that snow and flooding and rain are kind of sort of standalone elements that involve very specific activities. But weather in general, you can have weather hazards such as high winds and things like that that blow stuff down, and that's snow and rain are something that always happens every year and always have to be planned for and fixed. But you do have things with weather which are not common. So weather, of course, has its own category, as does flooding and snow. You know, you've got snow removal, and then you have the weather centers and the people who do all the weather stuff. And of course, you have animals with so-called animal control. And again, like I said, this is their declared purpose. This is not what they actually do, nor is it what they're actually doing. This is simply what they say they're there to do. And that way, when it doesn't get done, and when things happen, people go out and start yelling at these people, believing that this is their purpose. Now, I'm not saying in any way that these people do not deserve to be yelled at. In many cases, they deserve worse, like being shot or something else like that. Either way, it is important to understand the things they're supposed to be doing. The fact that they're not doing those things today is indicative that they are going away. It's not a matter of if, it's simply a matter of when. There's many reasons for this. One is they're not actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, according to them. What they declare is their purpose. They're not doing it. It's also the fact that what they're doing is directly inimical. That's a big one. But the other thing about it is that there's also a drawdown. They're understaffed. They don't under budget. They don't have anything. It's being drawn down. And if there is an actual emergency, poof, they're gone. What I mean by actual emergency is not one of these fake emergencies, but a real sort of crisis situation in which people are in a lot of danger and there's breakdown in infrastructure and there's all kinds of things going wrong and nobody knows what to do. That would be considered an actual emergency. And all of those things can and will be and have been created, especially by these people so that they can claim control. Either way, with emergency services going away and the fact that they're implementing emergency action plans, or at least expecting to be, quote unquote, overrun by the enemy, it's important to realize that when they're gone, the only people who can fill those roles are people who have developed their own individual capabilities, what these creatures in their corporate control structure would call volunteers. You go out there and you volunteer, but a better and simpler way of saying it is you just go out and deal with the situation. Simple as that. You can't do that if you're not ready. You have to be ready. So it's not necessary that everybody focus on all of these, right? You don't need to be yourself the individual operator that can do absolutely everything, and you can't do everything. You can prepare yourself to do all of this stuff if you wanted to, but that's a little excessive, and I would say it would be better simply to focus on certain things, especially if somebody has special backgrounds and they just simply develop those and create those abilities better themselves. Obviously, most people in rural environments who have no delusions about so-called emergency services coming to aid them or some other nonsense like that, they tend to take care of the stuff on their own. They handle their own things, but they also have a lot less to deal with in comparison to an individual in a city environment, say, who has to go out and try and do this stuff on their own. And I mean, imagine some guy in a city when there's a blackout going out and trying to fix the electrical lines. That guy's got a lot more to deal with than the farmer who's going out and, fixing the power line outside of his house because the electric company simply refuses to come out and do it. So the equipment, you can focus on any aspect, but the equipment that would be needed first would be probably mobile lights and alarms. That can take any shape. It doesn't have to be on a vehicle. It's simply the concept, and to think about it on how it's used to signal presence, right? Of course, every excuse nowadays they stick their lights and sirens up and disturb the peace, but that's not what they're for. They're supposed to be used for actual emergency situations. A first aid kit and other types of medical supplies or things that would lead to that sort of thing. A small basic electrical kit would probably be a good idea, simply so that you can react to any type of electrical problem or scenario. You might even be in just a store somewhere or a restaurant and you see that the electric's going down, and rather than everybody else who's sitting there panicking and calling 911 and doing absolutely nothing so that the situation gets worse, you simply go over there, maybe patch up the arcing thing with electrical tape or who knows what, and that's it, right? You just snip it off right there. No emergency, no trouble. Just gets done. A backpack, a satchel, or other type of carrying thing. It could, of course, be your own personal vehicle, right? You know, you've got people who are maybe a little bit overweight. They're not especially good for certain types of things. And then you got other people who are fit, and they should probably be ready to react to something in a more physical capacity, say running or going through difficult terrain, that sort of thing. Of course, the next is a vehicle. Think about what type of vehicle you want. You could have a high-speed, fast vehicle. You could have a durable, rugged vehicle. You know, all of those things factor in, and that would just require forethought into thinking how you'd respond to an emergency. Fire extinguisher or other types of fire fighting equipment, shovels. Baking soda works really well. Having a store of baking soda, perhaps a lot of it, because baking soda would be very effective against pretty much every single fire. And so having a lot of baking soda, which you can use to extinguish, would be a good idea. Water and a plumbing kit, specifically having to do with water-related emergencies and plumbing, the pipelines, things like that. Simply being able to go out and fix that stuff yourself. Which, of course, all of this would include maybe studying as well, if you don't know. Axe, hammer, other tools, weapons, of course, different types of weapons, various types of guns. It all depends on what your purpose is, what you're expecting, and what you want to do. If you just want to go out there and stand guard and watch people's backs because they'll get attacked by the current emergency services control people because they don't want you fixing what they broke, then who knows what that might entail as far as weapons goes. Appearance and useful clothing, that's important. Not necessarily the appearance of uniforms or so-called high visibility equipment, but also useful clothing. Clothing you'll put on, like a tool belt, or like the fishing vest, which is a misnomer because a fishing vest can be used for all sorts of things, but that's what people generally refer to it as, a fishing vest. You know, the vest with all the pockets and stuff. Obviously, backpacks, cargo pants, cargo shorts, work attire, that type of thing. That's what I mean by useful clothing. It's designed for these purposes in mind. A basic gas line repair, that would be interesting. Not many people probably have that type of stuff just waiting to be used. Communication devices, of course. You know, you've got walkie-talkies is the most common, but there's many other forms of communication that's important to note. There's equipment to deal with dangerous animals, which of course would just be like your basic type of stuff, and most of the time you don't actually have to deal with dangerous animals. These people blow that way out of proportion because, again, it's all about mental control. They over-exaggerate and over-complicate. I don't know if you can over-exaggerate, but they exaggerate and over-complicate very easy to deal with situations. because they want to make a whole big fiesta, a big party out of it to show that they're important, they have to be there, and you can't live without them. Well, today, it's not just you can't live without them, you will have to live without them. And there's a couple reasons for that. Flags, there's different uses for flags. You've got semaphore, they're generally used for signaling. Of course, they can also be used to mark locations, all sorts of things. Flags are very useful, different styles of flags, types of flags, etc. Not many people are very versed in the use of flags, but we're mostly versed in the what to do when somebody sticks up a orange flag or something. Some of us have, like you can, in the Marine Corps they use flags to indicate temperature outside. Black flag means it's too hot to do stuff, that type of thing. Mobile barriers, that's important to have. The ability to establish quickly and remove quickly barriers, not necessarily they're intended for obstruction, they're just sort of like, hey, this area is, you don't want to be in this area right now, so having some type of mobile barrier would be a good idea. Signs for hazards is the same idea. Pollution and chemical equipment, probably have more people today that have that than in the past, or recent past. Of course, there's many times in the past when people had quite a great deal of pollution and chemical equipment. Cellular tower and technology repair, that's a big one. Probably not many can do that. Roadway and roadside assistance. Like again, these so-called emergency services, other people like that, they're going away, and even in many cases the private corporate ones, as far as where we think about with insurance companies and whatnot, they'll be going away too, probably. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. You might have to deal with some random emergent situation alongside the road. And if you've got your roadside equipment, then you just fix it right there. No emergency, no crisis, done, gone, no problem. And then, of course, administration, logistics, recording, and coordination. Now, this is where you're getting into the more sophisticated control area. And if you decide to focus on this, it's important to note that this is the slippery slope that gets people in delusions of grandeur. If you go and set up a coordination tent, and you have people going there, and you're like giving out walkie-talkies or something like that, and you're recording things and whatnot, and all these things that the so-called emergency services people do, if you don't know what you're doing, you can cause a crisis and an emergency and a problem. It is important to understand that despite the fact that these little creatures out there have taken control using the administration mechanism, it is a simple support purpose. It is not intended or designed to obtain control or anything like that. The original intent behind administration, logistics, recording things, and coordination is simple support. It's to make things more efficient, to make things get done faster and better so everybody else can go home. It doesn't have to be permanent, and you don't have to be in a permanent crisis. Administration would be simply, you get somebody coming into you set up a tent somewhere and you say this is like admin coordination or whatever, and you just set it up. That's it. You just pitch your tent and say, I'm here to coordinate things. Simple as that. You get people coming to tent, they're like, oh, I've got electrical abilities, I've got a background with gas lines, I've got a background with cell towers, things like that, right? You can put them on the roster and say, hey, if we need you, we'll let you know, or something like that. Or we need you to do help out over here or something, right? That's administration, which is the same as coordination, of course. Recording is having a logbook. Either you as an individual keep a logbook on yourself and you record everything that happens and what you're doing in each event and what you did there, or you do it on behalf of someone else. You send out maybe somebody with people to record what's going on, what the issue was, what was fixed, how they fixed it, all that stuff. Logistics is getting equipment to people, and could be simple as supplying walkie-talkies. Right, those are things that an individual can do. It doesn't require some robust network or organization. A single person, if they've planned for this thing, can fill any of these roles. In an area where you have a lot of people, there will probably be a lot of people filling these different roles in these types of scenarios. Once, of course, they realize that there is no salvation coming, there is no 911, there's none of that. If you're in a rural environment, you actually have to do most of the stuff yourself. And a lot of people that live in rural environments already know that. A strategic application includes preparedness. Now, this is where we get into the vilification of being prepared, which is done through the doomsday myth of preppers. Now, people who get into prepping who are misdirected by the doomsday myth will prepare for a fictional scenario. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what they want to vilify with their doomsday preparedness stereotype or label, which is being prepared for life, for simple, for mundane, for things that happen which do not need to become disasters and emergencies and crises, because if somebody's there who has half a brain, they can fix it, no problem. Like I said, putting electrical tape on an exposed wire, it's done, fixed, right? In most cases, at least the situation of having a live hot wire is subverted simply just by wrapping it with electrical tape. Of course, probably want some other equipment along with you, maybe rubber gloves or rubber boots or something like that, right? You should probably know what you're doing, otherwise you'll, have some trouble. Of course, with these, with this preparedness propaganda, you have the opposite, which of course that everyone in general is ignorant and stupid, and they can't be allowed to do this stuff. And there's a couple reasons for that. Now, when the fraud in the line falls apart, that's where you get into attacks by uniform. They'll send out uniforms and attack you, and they'll always have some way to spin it for why it's happening. You go out there and fix a road, and you'll get attacked by cops, right? That's what most people think. But that's not always the case. You could get attacked by taxi drivers. That's going on in many countries right now, where you have Uber and Lyft and some of these other people who are coming along and trying to supplant the taxi drivers as they see it, and so those taxi drivers attack them. And it's the very same thing with emergency services. If you go into an area and you try to fix something to avoid it becoming an emergency, you might get attacked by the security guards if it's like a business or something. If you go and fix the gas lines, say at your office building, if you work at an office building, you could get attacked by the security guards for doing that. Absolutely. That is the level of insanity. You want to fix something to keep it from becoming an emergency. You do it, and you do it right, and you will get attacked for it. So you have to plan for that and strategic applications of it, that you may, there may be people who don't want you to fix things. They have malicious intent, and they want things to be damaged, and they want misery to be caused. Disruptions is another thing. If you can't get attacked and you can't get lied to, and you're going to go out there and fix stuff on your own anyway, then you'll find things that come up to try and disrupt you. Events happening nearby, possibly created or otherwise. But there's many different types of disruptions. That's the reason why it's sort of a gray area question mark. There's many types, many ways it could manifest or emerge. Homelessness is yet another one of those problems. It's not very difficult to fix. It's not really a problem, to be honest. It's an invented problem. But the emergency services, public service work people have to justify their existence. And so they create the homeless situation on purpose as a justification for why they exist. Of course, it also shows that they're not really doing what they're supposed to be doing, because the homeless problem continues, and that's what their purpose is, right? to fix the homeless problem. But they're like, no one can ever fix the homeless problem. Well, that's because they're creating it, right? That's where we get into created trouble and sabotage. If you try to fix what they've broken, they won't like it. And if they can't attack you for it, if they can't disrupt you, and they can't have some other, they'll sabotage your work, or they'll try to create trouble somewhere else. The next thing we get into that a lot of people are afraid of are drug addicts and mental illness. We've all probably seen the person walking down the street yelling at the sky and banging on stuff. That's just like the homeless problem. It's not really a problem. It's completely created to justify the existence of a whole bunch of tyrants and criminals and liars and thieves. The fact is, they're very easy to deal with. The current system is built to ensure that you can't deal with them. First off, you can't deal with them, or you're not allowed to deal with them except in certain capacities, and we're all trained that mental illness, it's not their fault, and druggies, it's not their fault. They have to go into rehab, and then you take them to rehab and people won't accept them and they bounce you around and you go back and forth. They're doing it on purpose. They also say that only cops can check in mentally ill and drug addict people for 90 days with something called a pink slip. This is a evil, disgusting system which creates the problems to justify its own existence. But in actuality, that's not a problem, and it's very easy to deal with. And they will throw these people at you, the mentally ill and druggies, and say, hey, look at this, let's see you try and deal with this. And then people panic and they get scared because they're like, I don't know what to do, because it's not their fault. Most of the time, though, it's in the moment, it's very easy to deal with. But if you have to deal with it on your own, it can be very taxing. It can be very difficult. And a lot of the reasons for that is you have a robust infrastructure specifically designed to keep you from dealing with this problem. This is a main aspect of their control, the ability to leverage control over drug addicts and the mentally ill so that they can flood environments and use them as effectively an attack mechanism. It's the same thing they do with children and women. They love to hide behind children and women, and they love to hide behind drug addicts and the mentally ill. Now, if all that fails, plague. This has been done many, many, many times. If they don't get their way, the usual little bully on the block, which is, it's my toy, and if nobody can play with it, or if I can't play with it, no one can. You know, that kind of thinking, that's how they are. If they can't do this, no one can. So plague. They destroyed Marseille in the 1790s, or actually 1780s, I believe. They decimated Marseille under the Regent. The Regent was trying to stop them from what they were doing, and so they destroyed Marseille with a plague. And they've done this many times. We've seen it many ways and in many areas. Cholera was poisoned water. So-called Black Death was most certainly not rats and a whole bunch of other garbage that they say. But there's many other more modern examples of plague, induced plague, because none of the other things work. The flooding the place with drug addicts and mentally ill didn't work. Sabotage and troublemaking didn't work. Direct attacks didn't work. Disruptions didn't work. Lying didn't work. So they created a plague. This is because all of this stuff is run by third parties. It is the third party threat and control, and is the main reason why not only is emergency services not going, or why is emergency services is going away and public works, but why they're also not actually emergency services in the concept that we think. They are emergency services for the emergency or emergent situation of the third parties losing their control. That's the emergency they're there to stop. And that's the main issue today, is the fact that you have third parties behind the scenes, the so-called deep state, the individuals who collectively want to retain control by any means necessary, and that's all they care about. That's the primary issue. It's not necessarily the cop that lives down the street. That person might not actually be your enemy. You never know. That person could be kicking down your door in the middle of the night and you have to shoot him, or you get shot in turn. But they could also be an ally, because they might not want to be ruled over and dictated to by bogus third parties. And I would say in most cases that to be true. Of course, then they'll put a uniform on anyone. They'll literally go and scrape the streets of vermin, human vermin in some contexts, and they'll put, I wouldn't be surprised if they have some sort of, like, I don't know, law enforcement rats. I think at this point they could probably swing just about anything with the types of brainwashed individuals who will just nod along and say yes and believe whatever nonsense they're told. Either way, the primary issue is not necessarily corporate control. It's not necessarily that these so-called emergency services aren't doing what they're doing and all this other stuff. It is, the biggest issue is that the control mechanism is leveraged by third parties for the third party interests. And we have no say, involvement whatsoever in that. And in this context, they are leveraging all of these services, all these public works, to form an attack, to cause disruptions of the infrastructure, to collapse the economy, to cause degradation. They are doing it intentionally and on purpose. So one way or another, either they get their way and they destroy things and emergency services goes, the so-called 911 type of emergency services goes away, or they lose control and it goes away. But like I said, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. So the next thing we'll get into is the realm of the unknown, because that's applicable. Channeling and unholy places. First, in the realm of the unknown, you're there if you're talking about something that has not been done before. Of course, once it's been done, it's no longer unknown. But you do also, I believe, have not done for a long time. Something that hasn't been done for 200 years is technically still in the realm of the unknown, or comes back into it. Because once somebody does something that hasn't been done for so long, nobody knows what it looks like, nobody knows what it feels like, what happens, the consequences, outcomes, all that stuff. You don't really know. Once something has been done, though, even after it's been done, has been done for a long time, it no longer becomes, it's no longer unknown, because it becomes known about the implications of it. Something that's done completely out of character, I would consider as being part of the realm of the unknown. And then it's not always once something is done, because you could have something done in a small capacity somewhere, but nobody else really knows it happened. If it's proliferated, though, the more people that know about it, the less it becomes a component of the unknown. So we're trained to have a fear of the unknown. This leads to a lack of innovation. And this is most present in the church with their constantly repeated phrase, "There's nothing new under the sun," and the rest of that sentence is, "So don't even try. You are insignificant. You can't do anything. You're nothing without the power of God." Right? That's the garbage that comes out of the church. Now that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but more importantly, they require individuals to be afraid of the unknown, because if you're afraid of the unknown, then not only will you never innovate or create anything, but you won't challenge their control. Inherently, anything, they're afraid of the unknown because anything can emerge which will threaten their control, and that's all they care about. So the fear of the unknown is an important component to reference here. Now we get into something called channeling. Probably one of the, again, yet another misunderstood thing, which is similar to ghosts. They want you to be afraid of a ghost, singular. If ghosts are true and their existence is possible, then you're probably talking about billions, if not an uncountable number of ghosts, and they want you to be afraid of one. It's like the idea of being afraid of your own shadow. Everything and everyone has a shadow. So you're going to be afraid of your shadow. Well, how about noticing all countless shadows that are cast across this planet? Same goes with ghosts. So it's the same with channeling. They want you to be afraid of channeling because you might channel an evil spirit or some other nonsense. And there's no practical attention given to it as far as their fear-mongering is concerned. The first thing I think is important to note here is chakra. That relates specifically to body energy. Your body is built like an antenna. It has circuits that run through it, your bloodstream, which has metal in it, and you conduct electricity. It is practically and in all capacities an antenna. You could broadcast with your body and receive, of course. Chakra is the focus on the corporeal energy of your body, specifically and only. That's what it's all about. Spirit channeling is, I believe, based on feeling. Whatever you're feeling. If you're feeling mad, you will channel angry spirits. If you're feeling happy, you'll channel happy spirits. It's just how it goes. When you have a certain feeling, you channel certain things. And I do absolutely believe a lot of this has to do with cognitive capabilities. If you're taking cognitive blockers, statin drugs, or some other type of mefloquine or a fluorine or any of these types of things that induce cognitive dissonance or dampening, you won't channel as much, but you'll still be a channeler. It'll be like an antenna that's broken. You don't want to try and broadcast on a broken antenna, by the way. And if you channel things through a broken antenna, it will come out garbled, but it will go through in many cases. In some cases, it won't do anything at all. But, of course, if it doesn't do anything at all, then you're effectively dead. Your body is, anyway. Mind channeling, I would separate from spirit channeling, because I believe mind channeling is from thoughts and activities. So when you're washing the dishes, it's a different sort of channeling. Now, you could be channeling a spirit. You could be angrily washing the dishes, right? But the actual act of washing dishes and doing things like that has been for a long time considered meditative practices with which thoughts and ideas come to your mind. That's mind channeling. And the most effective way that I do this today is writing stories, sitting down and writing stories. I know I'm sort of channeling ideas and whatnot, and I would suspect that many of those ideas come from perhaps the minds of other, even possibly dead authors or whatnot. And even in the way I'm talking about this, I can hear the brainwashing, the timidity, and the fear of being called crazy or a conspiracy theorist or some other nonsense like that. I can hear it in myself. It has been so deeply embedded that you're not supposed to talk about certain things because it will mean that you're crazy, that you're a whack job, right? You don't want to be like those people that go out in the street yelling at themselves. Of course, ignore the fact that they've got all of these chemically induced behavioral habits, and that much of the stuff has actually been done to them, and they have been created to be used as a tool. Either way, mind channeling is probably out of all of these, the chakra is all about the body, right? You know, you got all the people with their bodily focus and habits, the sensationalism that's taught in the school system, going out and sex, rock and roll, right? All that stuff, all body. The spirit, they try to focus on is only in churches. Spirit channeling you're only supposed to do in churches, right? You go to the church. That's asinine, because the spirit's always there, and whatever you're feeling at the time is always going to affect other people. It's going to affect your environment, and it's going to affect you. The mind channeling is the biggest and most important aspect. Everything built today is all designed to control your mind, to control your thought processes, and to control the language with which you think. If you mind channel without those control structures, then you could have dangerous thoughts which will challenge their control. So that's the big reason why there's so much focus on vilifying, demonizing, and trying to make you afraid of sounding crazy or any of those types of things. Now, this also explains why some activities are more appealing than others, why people would rather go out and do this or that, why they'd rather go to the gym versus go on a run, and vice versa. Some people would rather go on a run than go to the gym or go ride a bike. Certain activities are more appealing to people because when they're involved in those activities, they're channeling the mind, and they're channeling other minds or mental capacities, and ideas come to them. They prefer those activities over others. And of course, I prefer to sit down and write stories, and I've written many of them, versus sitting down and writing out a spreadsheet or something like that. Certain activities are more appealing to people because of the types of thoughts and ideas that come and get channeled through that. But I know that there's also connectivity with spirit channeling, and also with chakra or body energy channeling at the same time. So now we're going to talk about places and the fact that places are being made unholy, unsacred, or unquieted. So sacricity, or making something sacred today, is usually the repetition of simple adherence. The sacricity or sacredness of law enforcement today is done through repetition, through lying, through propaganda, through all of these mechanisms of obey or else, right? These are the right guys simply because they are, and that's how it is. They can do no harm, essentially. And that's the same thing with doctors. Doctors do not take an oath of do no harm. Doctors can do no harm because they have been sanctified. The churches at the same time have been sanctified. You are not allowed, and that's what censorship stuff is all about, to even talk about any possible things that anyone in the church has done, because it will mar the image of the church, because they've been sanctified. But that's different to a sacred place, which is, or a holy place, or what I would rather refer to as a quiet place. Some of the ways that this is done is by sowing discord. We would know that today as the rumor mill, creating rumors, starting rumors about people, saying that this so-and-so sleeping with that person, or trying to cause arguments, all sorts of things like that. That's called sowing discord. That is very obvious today in the current generation of women. Women, by far, are probably better than men at sowing discord. Obviously, some men are really good at it. But I would say, naturally, women have more propensity towards the capability of sowing discord. But this is not just a girl who's lashing out, or some lady who wants to be important. This is coordinated and organized and intentional. And if you have some people who set up a place where someone can go and think and talk and, relax, be non-agitated, you will have coordinated efforts to sow discord, to cause disagreements, to cause arguments, to cause rumors and trouble. Another thing they're doing today is the removing and changing of the structure and function of something. And then the third element that they generally use is the introduction of disruptions, right? Starbucks is an example where they take Starbucks away from a lounge, a business meeting type of setting with a calm and tranquil atmosphere, and they turn it into a fast food chain, right? That's one thing they do. They make Starbucks into a fast food chain. Then they also put pop music on instead of jazz. They hire people who are incompetent, which will create problems, and they remove their robust and effective employee retainment strategies. They effectively change the structure and function. It still has the same name, it's still the same brand, but it's nothing like it used to be. That isn't the same in all cases, but in most cases it is. Churches, that's another example. They barred the front entrance to churches. They're no longer a publicly open location. They're not. It's not the house of God, and it's not the house of the public. It is in fact the house of this organization, this nonprofit structure, this 501c3, this religious or group or creature. That's what churches are now. They have acquired ownership through claims, through fraudulent claims, and say, we own this place. It is our building, and we can do with it as we please. So they remove churches. You can't go to just walk into a church anymore and seek solitude or quiet. Country roads, same thing. They're going along and they're closing country roads. They're closing access points. They're damaging them. You can't just go off on a country drive anymore. You will have all sorts of things out there to remind you to be obedient and that you need to be in an agitated state at all times in all places for all reasons. Parks, same thing. You can't go to a park anymore. There's signs everywhere. There's threatening signage. There's closures. There's construction. There's noise. There's all sorts of troubles. Parks are not quiet places. There are still some, of course, but that is going away. They're attempting to eradicate all. They're trying to unquiet and unsacred and make unholy all places. Construction, as I mentioned, is one of the primary vehicles to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about types of places. Quiet places is the biggest one. Quiet places where you can go and contemplate and think about stuff. That has always been a core fundamental aspect of the idea of a holy place, it being quiet. A library, for instance, might not be considered a holy place, but it's considered a quiet place, and therefore would fit into that aspect. Natural places as well, and with an eye for something that is elegant and energetically designed, tranquil, beautiful, relaxing, and there's this phrase, getting away. A place where you can get away. Think about that phrase, get away. And it's the same idea with stories, with books, with movies, things like that. The idea is to get away, to escape. And then they call it escapism and try to demonize it. Well, in actuality, it's all about finding a place where you can think. Because anybody who has ever had children knows it gets very difficult to even think when there's consistent and constant agitation. If you can't get away, things become hostile. And then that hostility can be misdirected. And that's one thing they want to do. They want to agitate constantly to get people riled up and then direct that energy of being riled up towards their focus point. Of course, nothing gets solved, and the people continue to be agitated, and thus, when they eventually do another outburst, they can be directed somewhere else, like a barrel of a gun. Of course, the same thing goes with making the places hostile. Instead of being inviting, welcoming, quiet, good places, they switch it and they try to make it hostile. They try to turn the visible presentation of the place hostile. Churches today are hostile. You feel like when you go up to the front door, it's barred against your entry, that you have to ask permission, right? That is hostility. You get a hostile demeanor from people who work at stores nowadays, at regular retail stores, right? And often nowadays, if they don't have a hostile demeanor, then they've got it sets off alarm bells, and you think, you don't act like a regular low-wage worker. Low-wage workers are always in bad moods most of the time, and yet you seem to be relatively intelligent and also don't seem to be particularly uncomfortable in the position, right? If you know what I mean. So the turning a place to a hostile nature and trying to make everything seem hostile is also part of that unquieting, making places unholy. And this also happens to do with disturbers of the peace. Disturbers of the peace also include people who run around with lights and sirens constantly for every little thing, every little excuse, and they always say the same stupid crap. We're required to. I don't really care about the excuses or any of that insignificant, twisted words. Those really what they are, sniveling excuses. But the simple fact is that the disturbing of the peace is a coordinated and organized effort. It's not just the lights and sirens that they're required to use. It's also the people walking down the street, yelling at themselves and banging on stuff. They're created. All of that is created. All designed to make an agitated, to disturb the peace. And there's a reason why there is so much focus on disturbing of the peace. It's because it is used to agitate and cause trouble. Now, of course, signs, paperwork, including busy work, all of these things are designed to create hostility. You have threatening signs everywhere. That disturbs the peace, of course. That agitates, right? You got the signs, don't do this or that else or that or whatnot, right? Every little excuse they have to put up some type of threatening sign, they use. Busy work and paperwork are another thing, because every time you go into a store or some other place and you want to fix something, you always have to fill out sheets and forms and all of these questionnaires and all this nonsense. It's designed to agitate and create a hostile environment. Now, there's a simple energy component to this that without looking at the whole picture and saying, oh, look at all these little components and all these little aspects here and there and elements, you can look at it and say it's between speeding up and slowing down. If you want to make a quiet place, you want to make a calm place, a tranquil environment, somewhere where people can go and have meetings and talk and discuss and, have a drink or whatever, then you want a place which is slow. On the other hand, if you want agitation, then you speed everything up. You make everything faster, you make it revolve and go quicker and everything like that, right? In a natural environment, when you speed up, you exercise, you expend excess energy, and then you thus come to a state of relaxed and calm, which is why you go out and exercise, and then you come back and you can be tranquil. But in an environment that's agitated in the way many of our environments are, you cannot find peace anywhere. You cannot think straight. You can't think properly. You cannot relax long enough to think things out. There's constant and consistent agitation, which has to do with acceleration and speed, accelerating the energy in the environment. Slowing down the energy environment and focusing on the energy, on slowing down the energy in an environment would be the antithesis to the planned operation of trying to agitate the environment. And it is interesting because it does seem like there's always both at play. There's the yin and yang, the black and white, where one thing goes, another will arise. You close all the churches, you close down all the Starbucks, you change all of their perspectives, all of their functions, all of their appearance, you make everything hostile, you make people have to fill out iodes of mountains of paperwork everywhere they go, you make threatening signage, you make lights and sirens and noise and sounds and yelling and constant screaming and arguing and gunshots and everything, right? You do all of this stuff. There will always be somewhere that comes up in abandoned buildings, different, that's the reason why they try to burn down forests and stuff like that, because if they eradicate all of the holy, quiet places in the cities, all the people in the cities are going to go out into the country. And they absolutely, above all else, do not want those people ever having even 10 minutes to properly think. So they go out there and set all the forests on fire. It's very simple. It all has to do with the balance of energies, and eventually they won't be able to misdirect those people anymore, and the barrel of the gun will point at the culprit, at the right target, and they will be obliterated, and thus all the agitation ends, just like that. It's gone. Because so far, the agitated state, the people with their agitated state who can't think straight, have been attacking the wrong problems, the wrong source of the problem. So thus the solution has never been effectively applied, which is the destruction of the agitators, of the ones going out there, the ones disturbing the peace, the ones causing the mayhem. Thank you.